even if he says he will, he doesn't keep his word. And that's because he doesn't care. He just secretly expects me to do all the work. Now, that might feel true, but that's my story. The brain is a meaning-making machine. Part of me is an adult and is very capable and very wise. And another part of me is vulnerable, like we all are. So I think what we're really referring to when we say, ooh, conflict is bad, is destructive conflict. You know, Dr. John Gottman, who is the premier psychologist and researcher in the relationship space, he famously says he can predict whether or not a couple will divorce within 90 seconds of hearing them communicate.
Colette Feir, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. You are a couples therapist who helps couples find their spark back and rediscover connections, their connection, author of Secrets from a Therapist newsletter, and now coming out with a new book, The Cost of Quiet. Tell me more about that.
Yes, thank you for asking. So I'm so excited about my book. It's coming out February 3rd, but it's available now for pre-order. And I really believe it's going to change so many people's lives. I wrote the book as a culmination of both my own personal experiences in my first marriage, which turned out in divorce, in large part because I didn't know how to communicate effectively, and neither did my ex-husband. And then also in years, I've been a couples therapist for 13 years. So I would hear people saying many of the same things that I felt. You know, I want to communicate, but it never goes well. So then I don't. And I really identified that avoiding the conversations we need to have, avoiding conflict, is the biggest problem. It's not really that couples have these horrible fights, although some do that. It's mostly that we avoid communicating about our deep feelings and needs. And that leads to disconnection. And that's really the number one killer of relationships. So when I say the cost of quiet, quiet is really a euphemism for conflict avoidance. And in the book, I give people a method called self-connected communication for exactly how to communicate that gives you the best chance to be heard and have that really deeply connected relationship with emotional intimacy that is what we truly crave.
The title, Cost of Quiet, is a very powerful one. So what does it cost us when we stay silent for too long?
Oh, everything. Such a good question. You know, this is the crux of it. It's twofold, really. First of all, we ruin our relationships. Now, the irony is we're intending to protect our relationships by not rocking the boat, not saying something we think will upset our partner. It feels like we're threatening the relationship, but we're really undermining it because you can't feel close to somebody who doesn't know you. And it is normal and natural for all adults to have emotional needs. And intimacy, really, of course, there's physical intimacy, which matters too, but emotional intimacy means telling somebody the vulnerable thing, sharing your feelings. So we're slowly robbing our relationships of what would make them rich and fulfilling beyond a surface relationship. And then the biggest cost that I really want to emphasize to people, because I see it in my office every day, is that you destroy your own inner well-being. You end up mired in resentment. And resentment, as they say, is drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. So I call it the cave of resentment in my book, that you get trapped there and you're angry, you're bitter, you're shut down, you're disconnected from other people, you don't enjoy your life. And I would see couples coming into my office 30 and sometimes 40 years into a marriage saying, I have felt this way for so many decades that now it feels like it's too late, even though the partner's finally saying, oh no, I don't want to lose you. I'm ready to work on it finally. And at that point, they've swallowed their feelings and needs for so long, the relationship sometimes can't come back.
I'm sure there's a lot of experience out there that you have seen in the office that all comes down to the same thing, that everybody's too quiet, which eventually leads to resentment. And now there's no coming back from it.
Exactly. And you know what's funny too? People tend to think, sometimes I'll hear from people, oh, quiet, well, that's not me. I say how I feel. And I would say this, I generally hear this more from women, this part, that, oh, I speak up. I try to say my feelings. I don't let things go. But what they're doing that they don't realize is they're criticizing, they're blaming, they're sharing their interpretation of events instead of their own feelings and calling that communication. So it's also, I identified 10 ways we avoid that we don't realize are avoidance, some of them. And, you may think you're speaking up, but most of the time it's not coming out in the exact way that we'd like it to for the relationship to be good.
Yeah. I can see that. I can resonate with that.
Yeah.
What was the moment that made you realize that you have to write this book because there is a need for it?
Yeah, I wish I had written it sooner than I did because I think the moment happened earlier in my career. I think coming out of maybe a few years into my career, coming out of my own experience with divorce, and like so many people feeling like it was all my partner's fault, right? Everything that went wrong. Of course, we know on some intellectual level, everyone plays some role, but I really felt very wronged in my divorce. And as I went through my own therapy and then became a therapist and started doing the work, I realized, wow, I really did play a role. And that was in silencing myself or saying things that were critical or maybe passive aggressive instead of clearly and calmly taking the time first to realize what I felt and needed. And without blame, coming to my partner to say, hey, when you did this, this is how I felt. Here's what I need. It's a risk. And I think you have to develop the muscle to do this. But once you start to, you'll never go back. And so I started to realize, wow, this is the missing piece in all of these relationships. Some kind of avoidance or scrambled communication that your partner can't possibly decipher. And I've got to write this and help people learn to say it and do it better. But then, of course, life gets busy. And you don't spend the time because your life is so full with other things. So one day in 2023, right after New Year's, I found a journal from 2018 where I had said, this year, I'm finally writing this book. And it was 5 years later, I hadn't written a word. And I said, you know what? I'm going to never write the book if I don't just do it now. And that was it. I started writing.
That's amazing. You mentioned one of the missing pieces that couples don't really notice in their journey, in their relationships. You call that different types of conflicts. I think there are conflicts. Conflict is one of the missing pieces. But then you say that conflict is good. What do you mean by that? Is there a specific kind of conflict? Is conflict even healthy?
Yeah, it's a great question because conflict gets a bad rap, right? And it doesn't deserve it. So I think what we're really referring to when we say, ooh, conflict is bad, is destructive conflict. Dr. John Gottman, who is the premier psychologist and researcher in the relationship space, identified these 4 things that are the markers of divorce. In fact, he famously says he can predict whether or not a couple will divorce within 90 seconds of hearing them communicate, because they have the markers of destructive conflict, which he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And it's criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. So when those things creep in, right, conflict is not good. But conflict in and of itself, when it's constructive, when somebody is coming and saying, hey, I'm not assuming bad intentions on your part. I have a story in my mind about what this means, but I want to tell you how I feel. And I realize there's a hidden need in why this has bothered me, and I'm going to express that to you instead. So for example, just to make it really easy and a little more concrete, if you and your partner agreed that, let's say, I'll just use me as an example. If my husband and I agreed that he was going to do the dishes every night and I was going to cook, and then I notice that the dish, and I'm making this up because actually I don't cook at all. He does all the cooking. I'm going to out myself. I used to cook. I'm too busy now. So, but let's say we made that agreement and then I noticed he wasn't doing the dishes and they were piling up and I was starting to feel that like feeling of like, this isn't fair. And he said, there might be a story in my mind like, you know what? He doesn't care. It's all on me. Even if he says he will, he doesn't keep his word. And that's because he doesn't care. He just secretly expects me to do all the work. Now, that might feel true. But that's my story. The brain is a meaning-making machine. So even if it feels true to me, my mind is constructing that out of emotion and the history of the relationship and likely old wounds and messages I got in childhood. So my job is not to swallow that and secretly hate him. And every time I see the dish, look at him like, right inside. Or to go to him and be like, you know what? I'm so sick of this. I knew you weren't going to do the dishes. See, this is why I never ask you for anything. You don't even care. You just expect me to do it and you don't have the balls to say it. You know, that is a form of avoidance and destructive conflict because I'm raising my voice, I'm blaming him, I'm accusing, I'm taking my projected story and I'm pinning it onto him like the truth. I have almost no chance that I'm going to get a good response there, right? He's going to get defensive or he's going to shut down or be distant. But instead, if I go to him, once I've processed within myself and gotten clear on what I'm feeling and what I need, and I say, you know, I've noticed the dishes haven't gotten done a few nights. And it really made me feel irritated, disrespected, and even hurt because I thought we talked this through. The story in my mind is that you don't care and you secretly expect me to do it. I don't know that that's true. But here's what I really need. I need to understand why you haven't done them. And I really need for this to change going forward. Can we talk about it? Then I'm taking responsibility for my reaction to what's bothered me. And I'm coming to him with a very clear, honest, and vulnerable statement about my feelings and needs. Doesn't mean he could still be a jerk about it, right? I can't control that. But I've done my best to own my side of the street and allow that constructive conflict to ensue.
When you shared that example, you mentioned one of the avoidance is that behaviors is that you could lash out and then you could get defensive or the partner could get defensive. But one of the ways is going super silent. That's one of the different kind of avoidance behavior. That's one of the main topics that you talk about in the book too. Can you share what avoidance behavior is and what are different types of those behaviors?
Sure. It's so fascinating to me because this I only learned from being a therapist in action. I didn't even really learn this in grad school. So when your avoidance is really avoidance of conflict, healthy conflict is when you're not taking the time to process your own feelings, because emotions, let me just say this to set the stage, emotions are signals in our body. They are neurotransmitted information processing signals. We all have them, even though some people may feel emotion more than others. And emotions point us to our needs. That's why we have them. If we're sad, we know we've lost something that mattered. If we're angry, that usually means an action needs to be taken. A boundary needs to be set. Something's happened that isn't okay. If we're happy, that tells us to lean in and enjoy the moment. So every emotion has a message about what you need. So we've got to really tune into our emotions. So avoidance happens when we don't tune into our emotions, right? We shut them down. And then we do a host of behaviors with them. We either keep them internally bubbling up and we self-silence, as you mentioned. And there's all kinds of things we say to ourselves about why that's the right thing. Oh, I would say it if my partner would react well, but they never react well. I hear that all day, every day from people. And the truth is, it's your job as a mature adult to say it regardless of how your partner reacts, because this is what's healthy for you. When we speak our emotional truth, you can feel it in your body. It is healthy. So it may be self-silencing and just saying, oh, it won't go well. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm making a big deal over nothing. that's dismissing your own feelings before your partner even has a chance to respond. And I think that's the most common thing that both men and women do, is just to tell themselves, it's just the dishes. I don't want to make a big deal. I had a long day at work. The last thing I want to do is get in a fight. So if every time you bring something up, it turns into what I call a bickering loop, which is a very common avoidance strategy, right? I did do the dishes. No, you didn't. They piled up 3 nights. Yes, I did. I did them Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. This is not the conversation we want to have. We want to get to the meaning of it, right? The meaning is, I feel like I worry that you expect me to take on more responsibility than you. The other person's meaning might be, I feel like I make an effort and you never see the effort I make for you in the relationship. That's the real conversation. So whether we're bickering or we're self-silencing, we're avoiding having the conversation that needs to happen, which is really all comes down to attachment and the work of Dr. Sue Johnson, who created emotionally focused couples therapy. This is the gold standard in evidence-based treatment. And it's all about making sure your attachment bond feels safe and secure, because all couples are going to mess up the dishes, annoy the crap out of each other, right? I mean, that's just reality. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to not like your partner half of the time. But if the bond is secure, you're going to be able to weather it, and you talk about the little things. And so what it comes down to in attachment is, are you there for me? And it's an acronym. Are you accessible? Are you responsive? And are you engaged? So if we stop avoiding and we have these conversations in a healthy way, then couples can stay in the conversation and really hear each other and stay connected. Even when they're furious, sometimes you're deeply angry at your partner. And that's okay.
Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this episode and getting value out of these conversations, I have a small favor to ask from you. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify or anywhere else, I would greatly appreciate if you leave a 5-star review. It's going to help more people discover this show. And if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to my channel and drop a comment with your thoughts. I would love to hear your take as well. So let's keep these conversations going. All right, back to the episode. You made me question a lot of things when I was reading your work. So, because I started reflecting on my relationship as well.
Tell me.
I want to know, tell me this, is this going too far on the opposite side of the spectrum? I think that all kinds of issues, let's focus on relationships. I think we can boil it down to just one thing in order to fix it, is that if you live in the way that you are in service of others, so in service of your partner, which is what I think where me and my wife fall, because we are constantly in the guilt mode. You're doing too much work, let me help you. And she'd be like, no, you are doing too much work, let me help you. That's where we are. So do you see that as going too far on the end of the spectrum, or do we need to find a healthy balance there? Because that's what I think will solve every problem, because that's love. What else is there to talk about now?
So that's beautiful. And I love that that's your problem, right? Because the fact that you both feel that. I would say in the spectrum of problems, that's nice to have. But I do hear maybe a little bit of almost even enmeshment or overtaking responsibility for one another. I think a lot of people, I grew up Catholic, and guilt is like the way the whole culture runs. You know, you're always supposed to be doing something for other people, and families will say like, why didn't you do this for your brother? You know, you're supposed to feel guilty and then you're supposed to go do it. But from a psychological standpoint, I think we want to try to start relying on our partner to ask us if they need something, not to be martyrs, not to overdo. So, and you don't have to be reading your partner's mind, because we can't. So, you know, maybe you notice that you feel some guilt in these moments, and it's obviously something, a value system you were both raised with, and there's nothing wrong with it. But maybe there's space in the relationship as you move forward to say, you know, I'm going to try to work on letting go some of that guilt, and trust that if you need my help and you feel like you're doing too much, you'll tell me, and I'll be happy to help if you do, and vice versa.
I like that. I'll keep that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think for people who are actually struggling with it, I think it starts with listening to your inner truth when you're trying to find your own voice. When you are silent for a long time, that's at least one of the takeaways that I got from your work. How does someone start doing that when their inner voice has been muted for many years?
Yes. Okay. I'm so glad you said this because this is the heart of it. It is listening to your inner truth. You can't communicate well if you don't even know what you feel and what you need. And I do think this is a very hard part for people. And I give a very long, in-depth process to help people actually do this without coming to see me in my office through the book, because I think it's quite a process. But I also think there are some simple things you can do right away to start. And that begins with really listening inside. And, some of this language I'm about to use, like your inner child, before I became a therapist, I would have thought like, that sounds so cheesy and stupid. And I'm just being honest, but I've really embraced it. And whether you want to call it an inner child or just a more vulnerable self or whatever it is, there is truth that our younger selves haven't disappeared. They're just in these older adult bodies. In my case, very wrinkled, rapidly aging adult bodies. But tuning into that part of you that many of us are so quick to dismiss and getting curious, what is this about for me without judgment, right? That's the key. If you grew up in a childhood family of origin environment where nobody attuned to you, nobody asked you about your feelings. So many of us were verbally, physically, emotionally, sexually abused. And even if we weren't, many of us grew up in families where emotions weren't really paid attention to. I mean, I have wonderful parents, but I'm 52. In the 70s, nobody was going, do you feel anxious, Colette? Are you okay? Right? It just, everything was like, you're fine. Get back out there. You're good. No crying. Yeah. So we have to really start to reparent ourselves in a way by tuning in and saying, okay, part of me is an adult and is very capable and very wise. And another part of me is vulnerable, like we all are, and can get my feelings hurt and wants to know my partner loves me and desires me and I'm still important to them and that I'm appreciated. Those are those core attachment needs. So the first step is turning inward and really getting curious in your vulnerable self and that younger part of you that's still in there. What are you needing on an emotional level? And before you're so quick to say, that's stupid or that's silly or I shouldn't need that, like so many people do, instead, start to validate yourself. There is nothing you're feeling or needing that is stupid or silly, right? We do ourselves such a disservice, and we can instead bring a lot of self-compassion. And this is a practice that people have to really learn to develop. It's from the work of psychologist Kristen Neff, is how I came to it. Self-compassion is really life-changing. Doesn't mean we coddle ourselves. We don't take action. We don't encourage ourselves to move forward and grow. It's just saying, wow, this really hurt me. I have every right to feel hurt, right? And like that must be really hard to that inner part. You talk to yourself like you would your best friend, because in most cases, we're really mean to ourselves and we're really kind to other people. So first tuning inward, getting curious, then offering yourself self-compassion for whatever you're feeling. And when you do those things, you actually start to regulate your nervous system. When you name your emotions, when you send yourself positive, loving messages instead of harsh self-criticism or judgment, your body starts to calm down. And then you can get much more clear. What would I want to happen here? What am I wishing my partner would do? Even if I'm not going to get it, you're not going to get every need met. But what would I like to see happen? I think when I was younger, just to give an example, if my first husband didn't want to be bothered coming to one of my events, or Okay, I'll give you a really concrete example that might sound crazy, but I was very young in the first marriage. And after I had my daughter, I almost died during childbirth. It was a disaster. She had to be whisked away and resuscitated. And, it just was a very traumatic incident that in today's world, I probably would have ended up suing the hospital. But back then, it's 25 years ago, those things didn't happen. So I had been through a lot. I was 26 years old. I was very, very young by today's standards and alone in the hospital. And I remember our family saying, do you want your husband to stay here and spend the night with you? And of course I did. I didn't want to be up all night with the baby by myself after going through that harrowing ordeal. But I was like, oh, he won't want to. He won't want to sleep here. He won't like that. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to be selfless and say, no, you go home. You won't sleep well here. I'll be with the baby. Because I thought that's like what a good wife and mother should do. But I wanted him to stay, and actually I needed him to stay. So those are the kind of moments where if I have this process of tuning inward and getting curious and being self-loving, I could say, I'd really like for you to stay. I'm a little afraid you won't want to. I feel a little vulnerable asking you. But if I'm honest, I would really like you to stay. I could use the help. And I feel like I've been through hell and back, and it would make me feel comforted to have you here. Right. Yeah. And then I risk that he says no, which would be really shitty. But
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
Because you talk about many different types of avoidance behavior that we go through, but then also different types of communication methods that we can use to be close to our partners. I would say, tell me out of all of these, or maybe you can correct me on this. I think the one habit, a communication habit that would instantly improve and bridge that gap partners have with each other is being vulnerable. I know you talk about facing the fear, communicating assertively, being strong, listening to yourself. But I think being vulnerable is the one and only one. If we stick to that, I think it will solve like 80% of the problems. Just because that story that you said, that you are creating a narrative in your mind, that if you are vulnerable and if you're open with what your thoughts are, it completely collapses that made up story that you had in your mind. Right? Yeah. So am I right there, or is there more to it than this?
No, I mean, I think you need the other pieces in conjunction, but you are right that vulnerability is the heart of it. And in fact, in my TEDx talk, which is a distillation of the concepts of the book, I do break it down into exactly that thing, right? There's 3 things: that you're willing to take the risk, to act in the face of fear, to speak up. And then vulnerability is the second thing. And what's amazing about vulnerability is that because of mirror neurons on a scientific level, we have mirror neurons that mean that unless you're a sociopath, that when you see somebody tearful, vulnerable, open-hearted, loving, caring, admitting to their insecurities and their fears, it naturally allows us to replicate some of that. So when somebody is really vulnerable and says, I feel really insecure about this whole thing, and it's kind of scary to tell you, that kind of open-hearted vulnerability makes it very difficult for anyone to be like, screw off or critical or contemptuous.
Exactly.
It's just on a biological level. So you hit the nail on the head. Vulnerability is the heart of everything. And actually in couples therapy, what I am really doing all day, every day is trying to help people learn to get beneath all the surface level anger and irritation and the story and into that vulnerable place where they can say, my feelings were really hurt. I was embarrassed. I thought maybe you didn't love me anymore. And when you can acknowledge your fears, because almost everything comes down to like hurt, fear, shame, sadness, and anger, almost all of it. And when you can name that and tell your partner and ask for reassurance, that's what resolves most things.
most of the times people would react nicely when you are vulnerable. But let's say the response is anger or defensiveness. You mentioned that a lot of times, and I hear this in every kind of therapy, not just relationship therapy, that the root cause starts from their childhood. Now, I've heard that so many times that I either don't know how true that is, or maybe that I haven't dug enough in my own childhood that would prove that my values right now is the reason I am the way right now, which is why I'm not fully able to grasp that part of it, that everything that we are right now is because of what happened in our childhood.
Yeah, you're right. It's so often said. So I don't think everything we are is from the childhood. There are therapists who think that. I mean, there really are, and who tend to favor nurture over nature. I actually think a lot of it is personality, and then it's in conjunction with what happens to you in childhood. So some people don't have a lot of empathy, just genetically. But fortunately, empathy is something I do think you can learn. And I define empathy as just making the effort to understand your partner. You don't have to necessarily feel what they feel. I have women sometimes that they're like, oh, well, my husband doesn't react with, you have to also accept that people everyone has a different personality. And if you're in a heterosexual relationship as a woman, not every man is going to respond the way your girlfriend does with like tears in his eyes. And that doesn't mean he doesn't care. So there are things like that. But I think what happens to a lot of people that I notice is that if you grew up in a household where somebody had some mental illness, or there was somebody with a lot of narcissism, or somebody very manipulative, or somebody who wasn't there for you, what I tend to see that's fascinating is when the partner responds a certain way. That person who grew up with, let's say, a manipulative parent, and I'm simplifying a little, but not much, might say, oh, their story is, oh, you're manipulating me, right? I never think anyone's manipulating me, because nobody in my life has ever been manipulative. Like my parents are not like that. They're very, what you see is what you get. Everything's kind of on the table, and very loving. So if you had a childhood where somebody was constantly undermining you, twisting your words, invalidating you, they tend to assume when they're triggered that their partner is doing that same thing, because our mind pulls from past experiences. So
that's why I question this. That's why I question this. That we talk about experiences. You said that too, that it's about what you experience in your childhood.
To a degree.
But experiences, because there could be life-changing experiences when you are in your 20s too, which is why you are the way you are in your mid-30s. Right?
Okay.
So that's why I question that. That's why I question it.
Okay. So I'm glad you said that. And actually, I've had this conversation with other psychologists and pushed back on this myself, because I agree with you completely. There's a tendency, especially in certain models of therapy, like IFS, for example, which is internal family systems, is very popular right now. I think it's a wonderful model in many ways. It's dealing with parts of self. And there's also another version of that called ego state therapy that is more what I was trained to do. So working with different parts of yourself is very helpful to understand yourself. However, in a model like IFS, they do tend to see all things happen to you in childhood. The first 10 years of my childhood was pretty idyllic. I was responded to. I was loved. There was no fighting. I had a very happy life. My parents got divorced when I was in college. That was upsetting for me. But my first marriage, most of my own insecurity and my fear and my trauma is relational, that really happened in my first marriage in my 20s. It really wasn't childhood stuff. So when I have a moment with my husband, that's challenging now, it tends to go back more to what happened with my ex-husband than it does to my childhood. So I think also there's a lot of, this is my personal take, there's a lot of therapists who have become therapists because of their own personal journey and struggles and hardships. And a lot of times people who grew up in families that were very dysfunctional and broken, and they've become interested in helping other people because of those experiences.
Right.
I personally think if you had a very bad childhood, that you might be more likely to see all that's happened to people as a product of childhood, but that's just not the case for everybody.
That's a one person, one specific scenario, which is why the life turned out the way it did.
Right. And then also, I want to add to this, and I talk about this in the book because I address the nature-nurture debate. We've got to factor in a couple of things. We've got to factor in your childhood experiences because they do influence you, your values, the way you respond. I tend to assume the best of people because I had really good, loving parents, even if they weren't so into emotions, because that wasn't a thing back then. I felt very loved. I felt very safe. So as a result, my template for people is that I trust people, right? I tend to trust people until they prove me wrong. Maybe sometimes I trust people too much. If you grew up in an environment where people were not safe, they were scary, they abandoned you, they turned on you on a dime, you might have a template that you don't trust people, that people aren't safe, right? And especially if you were abused. Okay, so we've got childhood as one component. Then we've also got your later on years, what happened to you. Did you get fired where you were blindsided and humiliated? You can bet that's going to be part of what your brain goes to in a scary moment. Did a romantic partner break up with you, abuse you, right? All of those things, all of the relational stuff. And then we've also got your personality, your core personality is a big part of how you interpret things. Some people are more paranoid. Yeah, it's a part of it. And then you've also got the fact that because we're wired to bond and attachment is such a big thing, right? We're pro-social herd animals that are designed to seek close connected relationships in order to survive and thrive in the world, going all the way back to evolutionary times. If you're cast out of the herd, you would die. So because of that, our attachments are very important to us, which means that anytime something goes wrong or feels like a threat in a relationship, even a bad look on your partner's face, we're scared. We're programmed to feel afraid and do anything we can to smooth that out. So all of those things are at play in every single argument.
Yeah, that's true. There's lots of moving pieces here that it could be personality, it could be experience, it could be childhood experience, it could be adulthood experience, it could be just a shitty partner. It could very well just be that. As you said, it could be a sociopath you're working with, right? So there's many missing pieces here, which is why obviously I'm oversimplifying this and you are a professional with buttload of evidence in there. But this is why when we started the conversation, I said that everything can be boiled down to an 80% fixed if we live in the world of in service for others. And that's why the whole work that I do, the podcast that I run, my conversations and my topics are surrounding something I call the 3R framework, which is 3 relationships that literally shape everything around us. And that is relationship with ourselves, relationship with our work and purpose, and the relationship with the people around us. So if we focus on the work that you do, that is our romantic partners. So if you don't mind, can we go through all 3 of them? Let's just start with ourselves, the first R. So what practices do you think can help you stay connected to your own voice, especially when silence feels easier?
Yes. And the relationship with yourself is so important. I love that you break your work down into those 3. That's everything, right? Feeling connected
I think so.
to
At least for now, with my experience, I think that's what it can be boiled down to.
Well, coming from the world of psychology and being I completely agree with you. And
Perfect.
Having a sense of meaning and purpose is important. Having a good connected relationship with others, even if it's not a romantic partner, we need to feel close and connected to some people in our lives, even if it's just a couple. And then, of course, our relationship with ourselves. So I think there's a couple of things. And one, really in my book, I'm saying speaking up and being vulnerable and being assertive and telling the truth about what you feel and need is the best way you can honor yourself. It builds your confidence, it empowers you, and you have to be tuned into you in order to do that. So even if you don't go to therapy, I think a gratitude practice is very low-hanging fruit that is easy and available to all of us. All the research shows that people live longer who practice gratitude. They're happier. They enjoy their life more. It filters into their relationships and filters into their meaning and purpose in life. So the standard advice is write down 5 things every morning. I like to microdose everything because I'm a very busy type A person. So I wake up in the morning and I do every day. I got this from the work of BD Fogg and Tiny Habits. I wake up and I say, today is going to be a great day, to set my mindset in a positive frame. And then I say one thing out loud, just into the ether. Nobody's listening, but God, if you believe in God. And so if you feel foolish talking out loud, don't worry about it because no one's there. Say it in your head if you don't want to. Like, one thing I'm grateful for. It might be, today I'm grateful, even though I love my work, I'm grateful I don't have to see any clients because it's a lot of hard work, right?
Right.
So, or today I'm grateful that my children are alive and healthy. And it just gets you out of your busyness and out of all the stuff that doesn't matter, and it boosts your mood. The second thing is to have some kind of meditation practice. It can also be very short. I think mindfulness is one of the best tools we have. Even if you spend as little as 2 minutes closing your eyes, going inward, just breathing and noticing your breath. It can be that simple. And as we know, there are a host of apps, Calm, Breathe, Headspace. I mean, there's millions. If you put mindfulness in your Google browser, dozens of free meditations that are guided will come up. And a little bit of tuning in connects you to yourself, but it also changes neural pathways. And it allows us to learn to be more present, to learn to be more connected to ourselves, and to learn to be less reactive. And then I would add to that spending some kind of time out in nature, this can be very difficult, but we know it has enormous psychological benefits. Go for a walk, do what you can. If you live in a cold climate, get on a treadmill and put something beautiful on the screen. I'm very spoiled here living in Florida because it's pretty most of the year. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah.
But we need to see nature. We know that. I mean, there have been studies that have shown walking and seeing water is more effective for depression than psychotropic medication. So it's powerful stuff. And these practices allow you a little bit of space in your life to tune into you and to take care of you. Because what happens a lot is that we're focused on service to everybody else. And this is not to say don't be altruistic, don't help others. But we are the only ones as adults who will take care of us. And that's as it should be. But if we're neglecting that relationship in favor of everybody else, or our jobs or our busyness, we're abandoning that little child in us. So I think these practices help you get some space and help you get clear on what you feel and need. And then you have to be speaking up for yourself, having some boundaries, saying no to things, learning to disappoint people. It doesn't feel comfortable, but it really is okay.
Yeah,
all that good stuff.
Yeah. So the second R in the 3R framework is the relationship with our purpose and the work that we do. How do you think that tangentially helps us being more vulnerable in the name of, I'm not saying that's a weakness, it's a strength, but how does that purpose allow us to connect more to ourselves, and that will eventually bleed into all the relationship that we have around us with the people that we have? So how important is purpose or the work that you do?
Everything. It's everything. It's so important. I cannot emphasize this enough because I see a lot in couples therapy and just even, I've also done individual therapy for years, and I'm an EMDR trauma therapist as well, certified in EMDR, which is the eye movement for trauma. So I've worked with people in a lot of contexts, and I used to in the past work with people in addiction. So I see this across the board, but continually in couples therapy, that when you are not doing work that brings you a sense of meaning meaning and purpose, you're just completely shut down. You're disconnected. You're not living in the present. You don't feel joyful. We have to find a way to bring this into our lives, or we're shut down and we're half living. So it proliferates into everything. But I think when you look at any major school of psychology and all the philosophers going all the way back to the beginning of time, they all talk about meaning and purpose. You can be in the worst circumstances in life. I don't know if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Yeah, right. I mean, what a powerful book and a powerful story that this psychiatrist and psychologist managed to find a way to find meaning and purpose in helping others, and how you frame what you do, even in a concentration camp, right? When like giving someone a flower, and this is in the most horrific, defeated, fatal environment that is possible. And still he found a way to existentially thrive, in a sense, within the most heartbreaking context. So we can all do this. And a lot of people feel trapped in their job by circumstance. There are certainly financial constraints. There are golden handcuffs, even for some people at the top of the pyramid. I mean, we all have parameters. Not everyone can quit their job tomorrow and say, you know, I'm just going to podcast all day, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, there are things I'd be doing that if I didn't have to worry about paying bills. So there are practical concerns, and some are more confining for some people than others. I want to really honor that. But I also want to encourage everybody to find ways to bring a sense of meaning and purpose in your life if you're not feeling that, because you're going to feel very empty without it. And it might be that there's some kind of volunteer work you could do for 1 hour a week. Helping others does really make you feel good. You know, there's something you can do with your work experience to help younger kids who want to go into your career. Maybe there's a hobby that really brings you a sense of joy that you haven't done for 20 or 30 years because you're telling yourself you don't have time. There's so many different ways we can bring this, and it's so critical to psychological well-being.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack there for people who are listening to this. So thank you really, really for sharing that. And the last hour was the relationship with our romantic partners. We already talked about vulnerability. I think we can, from my experience, I think being vulnerable and being okay with healthy conflicts, I think those two improve so much of the issues that partners have with each other, right?
Yes.
So is there anything else outside of those two that you think that couples suffering should focus on?
Yeah, I think those are the core two. And, you know, by the way, I also have a lot of free tools on my website, ColetteJaneFeir.com. And I can mention that again at the end, but that can help you with some of these scripts to speak up. And then, of course, I get into it in a very detailed way in my book that's really designed to give you the A to Z of how to communicate effectively and have better relationships. But I would add to that, I think you're right, being vulnerable, right? And really making sure the way you show up in conflict is healthy, that you're not criticizing your partner, you're not blaming, you're not assuming the worst, speaking for yourself, using a lot of I statements, not a lot of you statements. And then beyond that, I would say, modern marriage has, and not everyone's married, of course, but modern marriage or relationships now can last so long. If we're going to be with a partner for life, this could be 60, 70 years that we're in these partnerships, where it used to be that we'd be dead by my age. You know, you had like 10 years. Marriage was an economic proposition to work the farm and have enough kids to be your little employees, and then you died. Now we want all this emotional stuff from our partners, and we want them to be our best friends. So we have to do some other things to be intentional about keeping the spark alive. And one thing I think couples can let go of is prioritizing putting energy in the relationship. You know, you don't have to you shouldn't have to work to be loved, but it is good to continue to do new things with your partner. We know novelty boosts attraction and can help like bring the spark alive. So it could be as big as going on a vacation to a new place or taking up a new hobby or class as you do with your partner, like, dancing or whatever, is something totally out of the box. Or it could be truly as little as, let's go for a walk together. Let's go drive to a new neighborhood and go walk on a trail we've never seen. This stimulates the brain in a way that produces attraction and connection. So seek out some novelty. And I think the underlying piece to all of this is you have to make sure your relationship is still a priority. It's very easy to say, oh, now that's good. I'm married or we've been together 10 years and all these other things on my plate, my kids, my job, all these things are demanding of me. So I'm going to keep borrowing out of the relationship bank and focus on this. No, you have to keep depositing into your relationship, your time, your energy, your heart. Have weekly meetings where you say to your partner, hey, let's spend 15 minutes. Anything bothering you? What do we have on the agenda? What could we plan that's fun? A little proactive stuff can go a long way toward increasing your sense of connection. And that really inoculates you from things feeling so hard when something goes wrong.
I've heard this many, many times from different people, from different life experiences, that they all talk about these weekly meetings or monthly meetings. Let's talk about our finances because it's one of the leading causes of divorce too. Talk about finances, talk about purpose, talk about what we both want from our lives. I have never seen people around me do that, or I haven't done that either. Probably because I don't wait for a weekend to plan that. We just happen to have those conversations anytime we feel like it. I don't think that's true for everyone. I'm just saying that that's what we do. Do you still think that I should plan that out on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, or is this okay?
I think that's okay. I think if you don't feel an accumulation of stuff that's getting swept under the rug, then I don't think you need it. But I think a lot of people will sweep things under the rug. And so having a little planned time to check in and just say, hey, did anything bother you that I did this week? Is there anything on your mind? Are you needing anything from me? And also, this is where it could be an enhancement potentially to what you're doing. Telling your partner, this is something I didn't mention often, what you appreciate about them. We really know from research that you need to hear ideally 20 positives in your relationship for every one negative, because negative feedback is hard to absorb. So, having a meeting can be a chance to plan, but it can also be a time to say, hey, the other day you picked up my dry cleaning and I didn't even ask you. It could be that little. I really appreciate that. Or you told me how proud you are of me, and that meant so much to me. I mean, human beings, it's just like in the workplace, right? If your boss is only ever attacking you and threatening to fire you, you're not going to like your job.
Yeah, for sure. I see. A few moments ago, you mentioned about your TEDx talk. Let's talk about that. What was the moment you realized that a book that you wanted to write since your journal entry in 2018 eventually started in 2023? What was the moment you realized that, okay, this is not enough? A TED Talk has to be in this whole brand scheme of things. Hey, quick break. If you're enjoying these conversations, you're going to want to check out my Substack newsletter. I plan on sharing bite-sized insights on productivity, slowing down, and really enjoying the work that you do. No fluff, just real talk, different actionable tips that I learn, books that I read, other podcasts that I listen to, or newsletters that I read. Basically, anything that pops in my head that doesn't necessarily make it to the show. So if you're interested, use the link in my show notes and sign up for my newsletter. Let's keep these conversations going. All right? Okay, back to the episode.
Yeah, thank you. So I was so excited about the TEDx talk. I think I realized that first of all, I love public speaking. I do a lot of that. So I really enjoy that. And I thought, this is not every single person is going to read my book. And it is my mission and my sense of purpose to really help people with this message of making sure you're communicating for you, no matter how your partner responds. And we know from the Harvard study on adult development, that 85-year study that showed that in terms of longevity, the number one predictor of a long, happy, healthy life is the quality of your relationships. So to me, this message is so important, and I wanted to make sure I get it out there in as many ways as possible, and that I could give people some actionable takeaways that they can do right away to start to change this. And I just thought that was a good way to do it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Did you get some help with people who would help you get on a stage, or was that just cold emailing and applying for every single TEDx stage in your vicinity?
Yeah,
how did that go?
Both. So first of all, I say I like public speaking. I think I've always wanted to do it, but for a long time I was very afraid. I'm a very sensitive person. I have fear of public speaking, like almost 70% of people do. And this is a very biologically wired thing because, again, we're herd animals. If we get cast out from the herd, we would die back in prehistoric times. So getting up on a stage in your body deep down feels like, oh my God, I'm up in front of the herd and I could be judged and cast out. So it's a very normal fear. So I did a lot of work to get myself more comfortable. And I did a lot of public speaking before I did my TEDx talk to try to get myself more comfortable. So I joined Toastmasters. I did a number of keynote speeches. I started going on the news a lot, all kinds of things, because I knew I wanted to develop those aspects of my career. And I also knew that I would enjoy it and be good at it, but also feel scared. So like I say in my book and in my TEDx talk, when it comes to communication, the only way to get over fear, the paradox of fear, is the more you do the thing you're scared of, the easier it gets.
Of course.
So by the time I did my TEDx talk, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't nervous. I was so nervous. And there were a series of problems that happened, like the mic didn't work, then the slides were out of order, that were so stressful. But I really, really enjoyed it. And the process of applying for a TEDx talk is really hard now because everyone wants to do one. So I got rejected 6 times before the 7th time I got accepted. And it really is a matter of, I mean, I would say if anyone listening is interested in doing it, if you don't do a lot of public speaking, definitely find somebody who can help you formulate an outline for your talk and maybe even do some coaching. I had some friends that I showed my talk to and got feedback, and friends who are really seasoned public speakers. And then it is a matter of going online and looking on the TED site. All the TEDx talks are run locally. So you have to go in there and find all the ones. Ideally, you have some kind of connection to them. You don't have to, but it can help if, hey, I live in the community, or I applied to one in New Orleans where I went to college at my school, Tulane University, and I still got rejected. I thought for sure they said they thought my talk didn't fit in as well as some of the others with their theme that year. Right. All right, fair enough. But I finally got one here in Florida, about 2 hours away in Sarasota, where I have some family. So at least I had a tie-in to say, hey, I have family in the area. And I just want to encourage people that there are people who have been applying to TEDx talks for years and not getting them. It took me maybe about 7 months. I applied to, again, 7, and it took till 7. So if you want to do one, do it, but just know that getting rejected is just kind of part of the thing. I mean, maybe you'll get lucky and get your first one, and don't let it deter you, because it's a very powerful way to get your important message out into the world.
Did these keynotes help you rewrite your speech, and then you didn't need that much help when you actually got the TEDx opportunity? Or was there a speaking coach who said that, no, we can refine this more, even further?
So I didn't have a speaking coach, but I do have a friend who is a very seasoned speaker and has kind of acted as my mentor. And he helped me. He looked over my talk. He gave me some suggestions. In fact, there was a story I had anchored my talk around, and he was like, Colette, this story isn't as good as the story you have in my book, as you have in your book. And I was like, no, I want to tell this story. And I really fought him. And then eventually something clicked and I realized he was right. And I'm so glad I changed it. So I think whether it's a friend or get somebody who does public speaking and is a good public speaker, because you'll be glad for all the preparation. And then I had done acting lessons years ago. So I reached out to my acting coach and after the speech was done and just said, you have to turn in yourself doing the talk on video. So I reached out and said, hey, can we practice? I want to get your feedback from like a presentation standpoint. So I did that. If I had not already been doing some public speaking, I think I would have needed even more help. But regardless, I got a lot of help. And I think this is your moment to shine in front of the world. And I was very lucky and excited that my TEDx talk was picked by TED as an editor's pick. So that was really nice.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw that. Yeah. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Out of the preparation of this, what was the most challenging part about getting on the stage by the time you were ready to get on the stage?
I still felt very afraid just to step out into that big crowd. It's all dark in the audience. I was the first one up. You know, you're being recorded. There's no do-overs, you know, and you can't have a script in front of you. There's no teleprompter. You can see your slides, but you're only allowed to have a handful of slides and they can't have like a ton of text. So they make you memorize your talk. Now they can't enforce that you stick to the script, but you're scared that you're going to forget. You've worked so hard for this moment. And then, oh my God, am I going to mess it up? You know, it's just, I was terrified, but about maybe 2 or 3 minutes into the talk, I just, the muscle memory took over and you get relaxed.
Okay. I think what I'm taking away from this is that doesn't matter how much preparation you do, the fear doesn't go away. So thank you for that. You just ruined my experience of applying for a TEDx stage. So I'll keep that in mind.
But you know what? Some people aren't as scared as I am. I want to say in fairness, some people are. I am a very scaredy cat kind of person. I think it's what makes me a good therapist. I'm a very deeply feeling person, but as a result, I will also feel fear in a very powerful way. Don't let it stop you, though, whether you feel a little fear or a lot.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, it's not helping right now, but I'll keep that in mind. Because of this TED Talk, do you think that the whole thing has impacted your brand? Because is it giving you more speaking gigs or more opportunities? Has that already started happening for you?
You know, it's hard for me to say. It's a great question. Certainly that's part of why I wanted to do it. I think it's a little bit of a calling card thing. You know, it's on your bio that there's a circuit of things now people have. You have a book, you have a TEDx talk, you know, all these things that help to establish you as a national or international leader in your space. So I think it probably helps to add to my gravitas and some level, but I don't know that I've really seen it or know of how. I did have one person reach out to me to say, you know, I found of all the clients who find me, I found your TEDx talk and it spoke to me so directly. That's why I reached out to you. But other than that, it's been more of like what a cool thing, or, you know, I'm applying to participate in a number of new endeavors that have more national exposure. And I think having the TEDx talk, you know, is another maybe piece of cachet on the resume.
Okay.
But for me, I haven't seen like a huge transformation of anything thus far, although I've heard from some people who have.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. It's just a credibility thing. It just adds another thing on your bio. So that's one of the reasons I'm chasing that as well.
And honestly, I think it's something in a way, honestly, that everybody should do, because I think it's great for your professional reputation, but I also think the process is such a growth experience. And I don't know that I'd ever do another one, but I'm glad I did it.
I see. After watching that video and reading your book, I gotta say one thing: you made me question a lot of things about my own relationships. I don't mean in a bad way, but after reading more, going through all the chapters, I got the relief that okay, I'm not doing that bad. I'm helping my wife enough. Yes, we communicate. Yes, there's some bickering there, but it's healthy conflict there too. So I think I'm doing okay. But you made me question a lot of things. I just wanted to let you know before we wrap this up here.
No, that makes me so happy. It sounds like you have a really good relationship. And that's part of why I wrote the book. Even the good relationships, we could push ourselves a little more to communicate more deeply, perhaps. And then your relationship's even better. So it's definitely not written for people necessarily on the brink of divorce. Although, those people can get a lot from the book too, but for people in healthy relationships and just making sure you're showing up for yourself too, always.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell people where can they find your work, your social handles, and when your book is coming out?
Yes. Okay. My book is coming out February 3rd, and pre-orders mean so much to authors. So I've got lots of freebies and VIP bonuses. I have a digital course that goes with the book that's available for free and a whole toolkit if you pre-order. And you can do that on my website, ColetteJaneFeir.com. And it's ColetteJaneFehr, because everybody misspells my name, ColetteJaneFeir.com. And you'll see a little book tab right up at the top, and you can pre-order there and get all these bonuses. And then also I'm very active on social media, particularly Instagram and TikTok and Substack. So on Instagram and TikTok, it's at Colette Jane Feir. Please follow me. I'm very engaged and responsive to comments, so I would love to hear from you. And on Substack, it's Secrets from a Therapist. And I send out a weekly newsletter with stories from my own life, behind the scenes, and also drawn from my work as a therapist. And I try to give a lot of value on what we can do in our relationships, not just romantic, but across the board, to be more vocal for ourselves, to connect more deeply, and how to manage some of these challenging moments. So please subscribe there. You can subscribe for free too on Substack.
I'll leave the links for all of this in the show notes and in the YouTube description for all of this. Thank you so much for this, Colette. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, and you're such a great interviewer. I enjoyed the conversation, and it sounds like you and your wife have a great relationship, which always makes my heart happy. So thank you also for your vulnerability and honesty. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.